Thoughts on being here this weekend as a parent and as an advocate?
Yes, so
Can you hear me?
So I'm so glad to be here, and it's so amazing to see so many people in the audience that are here together today. Over this weekend, I think we all can agree that being together as a community, to be here to support each other, to build each other up, and to share our stories of success, our stories of hope, and more importantly, some of the heavy news that we have gotten over the past couple days. I think the timing couldn't be better that we are together to be together as a community and learn how to advocate together to take over the next steps. I think all of us in the room that are affected by LGMD, whether you know it or not, you were born to be an advocate. You were born to advocate when people have asked you, why are you using a wheelchair if you can still walk? You've had to advocate for explaining that why, and you shouldn't have to advocate for that. But, or, you know, when someone says, oh, my aunt has MS too, I totally understand what you have, right? We've all heard that before. So whether you like it or not, you're going to be an advocate, and we encourage you to continue to do so. And you can learn so much by being with our community, and we encourage you to support each other and stand up together as a community. And I think it's a great time to do that.
Dr. Watt.
No.
We can.
Hey everyone, can we just ask you to keep the conversations at a minimum so that everybody can hear the panels? Thank you.
Hello?
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Dr. Wall, why is clinical research in all the LGMDs more important now than ever?
That's a great question, and I think when we think of clinical research, we think of it from many different angles and many different buckets. And so having someone come in clinic and allowing me to examine them and enter them into a natural history study, that's a form of clinical research, and that's something that benefits not just the patient, but benefits the whole community. Being involved in a clinical trial, that's another form of clinical research that may or may not have benefit for the patient depending on the design of the trial, but it's building an infrastructure so that we can start to develop more and more therapies. I think as Kelly said, we're learning that maybe there needs to be multiple different strategies and therapies, and so by creating infrastructures, and these infrastructures, we call them sometimes clinical trial readiness programs, where we're able to identify patients. So I need to know where the patients are, meaning I realize I'm saying this to an audience that's here, but whenever I'm in clinic, I need to have patients come and see me in clinic so that I can offer them research opportunities. These research opportunities may be just to see how a patient progresses over time. That's something called natural history. It may be collecting biosamples so that I can start to build what we call a biobank, so that we can have biomarkers, so that we can understand how the disease might be different amongst different people, or how it also progresses. And then it also allows us to start to answer more fundamental questions. And these fundamental questions are, why is your disease different than another disease? Why did somebody start having weakness whereas somebody else is still remaining ambulating at a certain time? And these are questions that I can then bring back and ask students in my lab to start to explore and think about. And so just by having patients engaging in our clinics and engaging in research, it allows building of all of those questions that will ultimately not just serve single diseases, but perhaps many different muscle diseases.
And then the next question is for Dr. Sproul. We heard a lot today and this morning about LGMD2IR9, but obviously there's a lot more diversity here in this room than just LGMD2IR9. Why should folks with other forms of LGMDs care about our program for LGMD2IR9?
Yeah, I think can't even hear myself. I think that the, in one sense, having, I don't know. All right, in one sense, having, sitting here in the audience, if you have some other form of limb-girdle muscular dystrophy and you're listening to multiple speakers talk about LGMD2I, a reasonable reaction to that is why, how does this impact me? Why do I care? Right? We obviously want we want there to be development of therapies and cures for everybody. And I'm very happy for these other patients who may have a therapy that's in development for their form of disease, but how does that affect me? And that's a really tough question, right? And you're sitting here in the room seeing therapies that are specific for this disease or specific for that disease. But the reality is that any successes that occur, build the community. And they build the community in important and practical ways. As a company that is, as an investigator developing a potential therapy in a lab, who's then working with folks trying to come up with a way to develop this therapy and ultimately bring it to patients affected by your disease, it's immensely helpful and critical that you are able to identify markers that can help you identify a signal, that you are able to identify and understand who the experts are in a disease, where the patients are, how many of them there are, but also to understand the pathway that you need to achieve. And seeing other programs move forward in a space, in a disease area, creates a pathway. It smooths the road so that a company that is trying to develop a therapy for a different form of limb-girdle muscular dystrophy knows what they need to do, how they need to do it, how they can approach the agencies, what are the things that they need to see in order to ensure that this product is safe and efficacious. And so every success that is seen in this disease area writ broadly, in the limb-girdle muscular dystrophy space in general, begets and accelerates the next success that comes down the line. And so it's all part of the same, and so we can celebrate small successes as a community, individual successes, knowing that it builds the broader community as well.
I just want to echo what Doug just said, and Doug emphasized the successes, but I think it's also important that we talk about even whenever there's a failure, we learn so much from the failures. And so those are times where companies will contact me as a researcher and ask me questions, and I'll be able to say, well, I think that this company did this right, and this company didn't do this right. And so it's building this learning experience. And so I in addition to successes, even if a study doesn't meet its final endpoint, we have learned so much from that. And one thing we've also learned is we've learned that we can bring the community together. And that's really the very first step, is identifying and bringing patients together.
Thank you guys for that. The next question is really for Kelly. I've heard a lot of folks talking about being an expert in your disease or owning your disease. What does that mean, and why is it so critical?
Yeah, and to piggyback off what Dr. Weil said, the best way to be an expert in your disease is, one, come to conferences like this, because we are surrounded by the best clinical and scientific experts that we could ever ask for. So kudos to all of you that could make it, and for you that are listening online, you can't be surrounded by more educated people that can help us learn about our disease and become experts in our own path. I think the other thing too is, getting to clinic if you can. Find an MDA clinic or, someone with a expertise in neuromuscular understanding, so that you can learn more, and make sure that you are following along all of the standards of care guidelines that have been developed and that we're still working on actively in multiple subtypes for the limb girdles. We heard a little bit in the Lunch and Learn yesterday about the standards of care that Treat NMD is working on for us. And so just keep educating yourself, keep learning. And the other thing you can find out about is by going to your clinics. You'll know when there is a clinical trial that opens up for your subtype, and whatever that may be. And whether it's a natural history study, a clinical trial, all those things are going to be so important, because numbers matter. And if you're not going to the clinic, you're not going to be counted as someone who could be eligible for a certain clinical trial. So I think that's really important. And just make sure you take these guides and tools with you if you're in the emergency room for any reason, or if you have a surgery coming up. Your local general hospital most likely won't know anything about limb-girdle. Chances are. It is so ultra rare and it's so specialized. And unfortunately, many of the people in this room can only be in so many clinical settings. So the more you can learn to take those tools with you, the better and more safety you will have when you have any sort of procedures being done.
Dr. Weil, why should patients come to the clinic? How is that clinic experience evolving? And why is it important, especially right now, to come to the clinic?
Yeah, that's a great question. I get asked from patients all the time. Why should I come? You don't do anything for me. All you do is tell me that I'm getting weaker. And I understand that. I do. I want to quickly, though, echo what Kelly said, which is advocating. And I know that a doctor might not know you might see a community doctor who might not know your disease, or you're going to hear me say, please bring your genetic test result, and I'm putting it on you to do it. And I understand that that's an extra burden that I'm asking you to do. And just hearing Kelly say how you're advocating for yourself every day just because of who you are, I understand that extra burden that I'm asking. But it's important that we do that so that we can provide the best care. And so I'm not saying I shouldn't be a better doctor. I'm just saying, how can I help you advocate for yourself in a way that I can then be a better doctor? And that means coming to clinic. And why do I want you to come to clinic? I know that getting to St. Louis, WashU, parking is terrible. I know that there might not be an elevator that's working. Like, I understand all of that. And so, but I'm asking you to come so that I can understand your disease better, so that I can train the next generation of physician scientists who need to see the diseases that are so rare. In addition, whenever a company contacts me and says, do you have any patients with LGMD R87? I can say, yes, I have them. And the next question the company will ask is, how many have you seen in the last year? And then the next question they'll ask is, how many of them are ambulatory? How many of them are non-ambulatory? And if I haven't seen you in the last year, I can't answer all of those questions. And then the company's going to say, I don't think your site has it together, and we're going to go to some other site. And so that's just the honest truth about how it works. And so coming back to clinic and being engaged in clinic is a burden. I understand that. But it's important so that we can offer not only the best care, but that we can advance research and accelerate it. I didn't even bring up the importance of the care that we can offer, but those are other aspects too.
Well, what is the difference between clinical care and clinical research? Can you explain that?
Yeah, so the difference between clinical care and clinical research, so all of the MDA sites and physicians will provide you with clinical care. That's actually the first and foremost. If you were to ask me what's the most important thing I need to do, it's offer clinical care. It's being able to answer your questions and engage in a relationship that I can help you understand your disease, understand the trajectory of your disease, anticipate when things are happening, offer support through other ancillary staff. That's what clinical care is. Clinical research is really a selfless gift that you are giving to us by being involved in a clinical study so that I can help educate myself, my research team, others in the community. And the clinical research doesn't necessarily stop you from getting clinical care. And I want everyone to understand that. You will get clinical care no matter what, even if you're not associated with a clinical research study. A clinical research study is something that helps us kind of move the steps forward.
Awesome. And what does it actually mean to have a genetic diagnosis, and why is it important to actually have that genetic diagnosis, like the paper on you all the time?
Yeah. So we've learned, I think, a lot, and I think many of you have heard about the different genetic subtypes. of disorders. So one reason to have a genetic test result is because many patients will say, I have limb-girdle muscular dystrophy. And we've learned now that there is a much more specific way to starting to understand that. And so not only do I need to know that you have limb-girdle muscular dystrophy, but I'd like to know that you have limb-girdle muscular dystrophy type R9 or R2. However, the world is becoming even more complicated because I want to actually know the genetic mutation you have. And the reason is as we start to develop therapies, they're going to be focused on the genetic mutation that you have. And so I'm going to say this, the same questions of how many patients do you have in clinic? How many patients do you have that are ambulatory? How many patients do you have in the last year? The next question is, how many patients do you have that are homozygous for this mutation? And so I need to know that. You guys have seen medical records that are electronic, and they are complicated, and they are not easy to sift through. There is no special tab that says genetics on it. And so I need patients to bring their genetic tests with them. You can ask any physician, if you had your genetic test done, ask them for a copy of it. If they don't give it to you, say, Dr. Weil said I could have a copy of it. You need to get a copy of it. It needs to be your new Social Security number. It goes in your lockbox at home, and have it, because it's implications not just for you, but for your family as well. And so I just really want to bring that up.
So you're saying that we should laminate the genetic test results and...
That would be great, yeah, yeah.
Okay. Kelly, the next question is for you. What does standard of care mean, and how does it impact how the community or individuals actually think about their care?
Yeah, so with standards of care, I think, just to, add on to what Dr. Weil was saying is knowing your subtype is so important. It's crucially important because the different subtypes, although we are all limb-girdle muscular dystrophy, we're all here for the same reason. Each subtype has significant nuances. Some of them may have cardiac complications. Some may have respiratory complications. Some may have very different standards of care. So when you go to the clinic, depending on what your subtype is, you're going to have very different recommendations for assessments each year to assess whether you have cardiac, extensive damage over the years and things like that. So yes, knowing your subtype matters, but also making sure that when you do go to the clinic, as we talked about earlier, not all clinics are equipped with neuromuscular specialists that really understands the nuances of all these different subtypes. So making sure you're taking the standards of care guidelines with you if you have them for your subtype, or the family guide that we talked about yesterday, bring that to the clinic with you so you can educate your providers so that they are aware of what nuances your subtype might have.
Real quick, I just want to ask again if we could keep conversations in the room to a minimum. It gets quiet and then it starts to go back up. If we could just keep it quiet. They only have a few more minutes. I understand you have a lot to say to each other, and networking is great, but let's give them the attention they deserve. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Actually, this next piece of information is really relevant for everyone in the room. There are free and complimentary genetic testing programs. So please go to your neuromuscular specialist, and if they don't know that there's a free program for genetic testing, let them know there is. It's through the Lantern Project, and the other one is Invitae. So the Lantern Project and Invitae, those are the two complementary, which means free genetic testing programs, and you will be able to determine your specific limb-girdle subtype.
And I would also, just to add to that, is also many people in this room have been misdiagnosed over the years, right? So years ago, before your specific subtype was identified, you might have been told you had a very different condition than limb-girdle related. So I encourage you, if you haven't had that done, it's not too late. You can have it, tested again now that more genes have been identified.
That's another great reason to come back to clinic. I tell every patient I reserve the right to change your diagnosis every time I see you, because I learn new things every year. I learn new tests. I understand diseases more frequently. And so that's really important to come back to clinic, not just to hear about new treatments, but so that we can revisit your diagnosis. And I know every time I see a patient in clinic, I start from the beginning, and they look at me like, you should already know this, but no, I am rethinking your diagnosis every single time.
And one last thing is, please make sure if you haven't that you see a genetic counselor. This is a quick plug to genetic counselors. They are invaluable resources to help you understand what your diagnosis means, what those genetic mutations mean, and whether you have heterozygous or homozygous. There's many people I talked to this weekend who don't know. They have their subtype, but they don't know which type of mutation within that subtype. So there are a lot of details that you can learn, and if Colleen Campbell were in the room, she'd be proud of me for saying that.
Okay, well, I have one more question, and then I'll let all of our panelists kind of say their final thoughts. But my last question is about ICD-10 codes, which is something I'm sure a lot of you heard about. What is an ICD-10 code, and why did Cure LGMD2I Foundation and other patient advocacy organizations petition to get specific ICD-10 code for limb-girdle 2IR9, and why is that important?
Well, I have to give a shout out to our entire LGMD coalition. I would say going for an ICD-10 code was actually one of the first major projects that we all worked on and came together, from the Speak Foundation to LGMD Awareness Foundation to the 2D Foundation. I could go on all day, Cure Coalition, Cure Campaign, you name it. We all came together and we said we can no longer be known as muscular dystrophy unspecified. We deserve more than that. So about 4 years ago, a group of multiple advocacy orgs came together and we petitioned, including with the help of MDA. We were able to get several ICD-10 codes for several of the LGMD subtypes. 2I was not included at the time, so we just in the last year went back again and we revisited for 2IR9 specifically, and we were successful, so we are celebrating that. It will be in effect in October. But why is that important was the ultimate question. So really, they are basically the gateway to your healthcare. Without an ICD-10 code, you aren't going to be counted. When we talked about the numbers, if a drug company wants to study a certain indication, they're going to look as how many patients are identified for this condition, and is it worth it? Is it worth the return on the investment? And so if we don't have that identification code, it's harder to find out how many patients there are. Also, when a drug is finally approved for one of our conditions, we want it to be covered by our insurance provider. And when you have an ICD-10 code, that there is more likely that they can justify reimbursement for the coverage of that drug. So I'll let the other experts on this panel elaborate on that. But
I think you're spot on. I think knowing the prevalence through the healthcare system is important to know. I would say the other reason we do ICD-10 codes has to do with the care that goes and is associated with your disease. So getting durable medical equipment, ensuring that you get a cardiologist appointment, all of that is then linked with that ICD-10 code, which then says, oh, this muscular dystrophy can have cardiac implications, and the reason I'm prescribing this. And so it ends up having this whole kind of cascade of differentiating each of the limb girdles.
Wow, everyone just quieted down. So we are going to conclude, and I just really wanted to thank our panelists and thank you as members of the community for listening. Our panelists are going to be available for Q&A afterwards, so please feel free to come up. But if we could give a round of applause to everyone, and thank you guys for being here.